Hey friends, welcome back to the Journal Feed. My name is Nick Zelt, and this is the only place to be spoon-fed the latest and greatest of emergency medicine. This is the audio version of the past week's summaries, which originally went up on our blog. This week they were brought to you by Michael Stoker, Joshua Belfer, Kimiko Dunbar, Nicholas Sryka, and Clay Smith. So without further ado, I bring you the first article, which was titled Hospital Trauma Compendium, Pre-Hospital Management of Spinal Cord Injuries, a NAEMSP comprehensive review and analysis of the literature, out of the journal Pre-Hospital Emergency Care. As with most dogmatic practices, spinal immobilization started as a very reasonable idea and entered into widespread practice without any real evidentiary support or implementation studies. This was actually way back in the Second World War, when some guy thought, hey, I see a lot of these people who get injured, they get spinal fractures of some kind, and the deficits that they have when we first see them are not as bad as they are later on. And so they posited that perhaps sometime during transport or movement, the fact that they were not immobilized made their injury worse. This is a very reasonable thing to think, and I do not blame them, and thus why we've been using these for the last 80 years. And it's only now that we're starting to think, hey, maybe not so good. They were all very well intentioned, and so have we been, though now we're much more aware of the harms of immobilization, especially on a hard board, but even with those cervical collars, such as pain, respiratory suppression, ulcers. Now we have to weigh proven harms against unproven benefits. Though the logic is really sound, I cannot count how many times medicine has been led astray by physiological arguments. They often don't hold water very well, unfortunately. And thus, opinions have slowly started to shift, and we've become less and less stringent about immobilization. Now, what the authors wanted to do was answer a few questions about this. Does spinal immobilization prevent delayed spinal cord injuries? Previously, it was assumed to be due to movement, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, pathophysiologically, as far as we know to date, that seems to point more towards hypoperfusion due to vascular injuries, which will cause delayed neurological deficits due to ischemia, rather than movement of the spine. And this is why we are often told to target high MAPS when your patient has a spinal cord injury. Also, there's cord edema, contusions, hematomas. These can all also cause delayed injuries. This has to be weighed against the harms. The risk of decubital ulcers can happen within minutes, not necessarily hours on a hard surface, a hard board, a hard backboard. Also, there's even harm from immobilization to the neurological system, which is exactly what we're trying to protect. Several authors have shown that these patients who have hard cervical collars or any cervical collars have higher ICPs. And if we're just trying to think, hey, but at least we're not moving their backs around, that might not even be true. Cadaveric studies have shown that sometimes we cause significant dissociation of people's spines when trying to apply collars, as much as nearly 10 centimeters, which is a lot. This is on top of the possibility of missing injuries which are covered by the collar. You want to really undress your patients, see everywhere, but people are not eager to take off cervical collars. And this is a good summary of many, many articles showing harm. These authors reviewed 4,000 manuscripts and included 115. Among all of these, there was actually one study that showed benefit, but it was only a subgroup finding, so hypothesis generating at best, with multiple methodological problems. Now I'm going to read for you a quote from the article, which I thought was great. Here we go. Based on the compiled evidence, we believe that there is indisputable evidence that immobilization causes significant and potentially life-threatening harms, which continue to mount. And we found no definitive evidence that there is clinical benefit to immobilization or procedures designed to restrict movement. Those are not shy claims. These authors are really telling it like it is, and this is what the evidence is telling us so far. Mind you, all of this is based on largely poor quality evidence because not a lot of people are randomizing people to collars and stuff like that, and you don't get that many of these outcomes, so they would have to be really big studies to show differences. So while there is, of course, the limitation that's not great quality evidence, it is the sum total of the evidence that we have, and it is our best educated opinion and option to follow this. So it looks like we're really going down with immobilization, but I'm so used to it. I feel like it does possibly serve some function if I want to play a little bit devil's advocate, at least, that your patient suffered some kind of trauma and that you're worried about their neck. That's silly, I know, and the collar leads to more scanning. We've already shown that in other studies too. People get scanned more just because they came in wearing a collar. It just makes people nervous. I find it hard to really justify it. My biggest hurdle is that often I've seen radiology departments that won't do a CT of the C-spine without a collar on. And so often I do not insist or put a collar on my patient, but I still think that they should get a CT scan. But I can't get a CT scan unless they have a collar on. So that's some departmental problems. Hopefully you guys don't have that problem. But, it's hard to have the whole world catch up with the evidence all at once. I will continue to not be stringent about collar use, and I won't even necessarily advocate for it, though I can't help but think that it's going to be a long battle before we truly get rid of these precautions. I mean, it just makes so much sense. If you have any other fracture, we try not to move it, we immobilize it. It seems that when we try to do that to the spine, it causes too many harms. Maybe in the future we'll find out a way that we can move patients less without hurting them. Hopefully that would be the best of both worlds. In a spoonful, spinal immobilization does more harm than good, and delayed onset neurological findings are likely due to hypoperfusion rather than movement of the patient. Okay, and then we move on to the fifth article, titled Diagnostic Accuracy of the Standing Algorithm in Patients with Isolated Vertigo, a Multi-Center Prospective Study, Standing M, out of the Journal of Emergency Medicine. I like the standing algorithm, but it has a hole in it. Patients with no nystagmus, but they can walk. So they have no nystagmus at rest, but it doesn't seem to be positional, otherwise you could just follow the BPPV routes. There's no real track for these patients, which is an unfortunate part of the rule because, sometimes that happens. But I guess maybe in those circumstances, you try to really dig down to see if this patient truly has vertigo. Anyways, these authors wanted to do a prospective multi-center observational trial done across 4 emergency departments in Italy. Each site had at least 3 emergency physicians who had dedicated training at doing the standing algorithm, which is not complicated. I don't think that's a huge limitation here. The standing algorithm's not that hard to do as an algorithm, really. I will say that the head impulse test can be a little bit finicky, and that these patients did get to use those Frenzel goggles, so they definitely had an advantage for spotting nystagmus. But otherwise, I think pretty much anybody could do this, though the data doesn't really back me up when it seems like we suck at the HINTS exam. They were able to recruit 456 patients who were randomized to either usual care, whatever the doctor thought was appropriate, or doctors who followed the standing algorithm. In this study, for the outcome of central causes of vertigo, the standing algorithm had a sensitivity of 88%, a specificity of 92%, that gave a negative predictive value of 99%, and a positive predictive value, not that bad, of 44%. Usual care actually had a better sensitivity, 96%, but the specificity suffered at 36%. And the positive predictive value was even worse at 15%. So we seem to be a little bit more sensitive just in usual care, but you're definitely not as specific. So you're probably scanning too many people. And that's what we saw here. Patients who followed the standing algorithm scanned less patients. 48% versus 67%, that was a significant difference. Also, if you used the standing algorithm, you had a shorter length of stay, not surprising because safety outcomes seem to be identical between the two, without any difference in deaths, strokes, or instances of reperfusion or neurological intervention between the two groups. I mean, it wasn't all better for the standing algorithm. These patients did get more MRIs without a significant decrease in consultation rates for neurology, so it wasn't all good. And the sensitivity, like I said, it wasn't perfect, but if you look at the cases that were missed by the standing algorithm, they were not strokes. One was multiple sclerosis and the other was viral cereballitis. I find that reassuring still, though those are both potentially central causes of vertigo that still should have been picked up. Now, I don't think that these test characteristics are amazing, though I do like a negative predictive value of 99%. I like the standing algorithm because how else would you evaluate your patients anyways? What are you doing besides this? I don't think that you necessarily need to follow it like a step-by-step algorithm, but how are you not doing all the steps of the standing algorithm anyways? And that's why I like it, because I don't know what else I would be doing with these patients. I'm doing this anyways. It just seems like a very reasonable approach to a patient with vertigo. Do you have to follow it dogmatically? No, I don't think so, but it seems like a pretty good track to me. In a spoonful, this was a perfectly legitimate validation of the standing algorithm. The test characteristics, like I said, are not amazing, a sensitivity of only 88%, but you don't have to follow it dogmatically. This is just to help you get to a diagnosis. You don't have to follow it perfectly. So if your gestalt says something otherwise, you can still follow it. But if you're following the standing algorithm generally, I think you're doing a good assessment. Okay, that's all the articles we had from this week. Let's do a wrap up of everything we talked about. From the first article, forget the collar and board. Honestly, I'm up for it in these patients who would have normally had spinal immobilization. Maybe we're doing more harm than good. And then from the fifth article, this was a study to validate the standing algorithm, and it did pretty well. Now, if you are hearing this right now, then you are not a part of the members feed, and so you missed 3 articles that I could have summarized for you. Or those articles about, well, one of them was revisiting multiple doses of ondansetron for kids with acute gastroenteritis. You probably want to hear this article. Then another article you missed was point of care troponins, and are they going to let you send your patients home sooner? And then finally, we covered an article that was talking about pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, pretty much all you need to know about it. Links to all the original articles can be found at journalfeed.org, or just follow the links in your show notes. Our goal here is for you to keep up with the literature the easy way, through spoon feeding.